Growing up, the treehouse in my grandparents' backyard was my sanctuary. Built decades ago by my grandfather, it was a sturdy wooden structure nestled in the arms of an ancient oak tree. The treehouse was simple: 4 walls, a slanted roof, and a single window overlooking the sprawling fields. My cousins and I spent countless summers there, telling stories, playing games, and imagining fantastical adventures. But as the years passed and we all grew up, the treehouse was left to the elements, forgotten and overgrown. Last summer, I returned to my grandparents' home for the first time in years. My grandfather had passed away, and my grandmother needed help sorting through the house. While exploring the backyard, I felt a pang of nostalgia when I saw the old treehouse, its wooden boards weathered and moss-covered. Something about it seemed to call to me, and I decided to climb up and relive those childhood memories. The ladder creaked under my weight, but it held. The treehouse was just as I remembered, though dust and cobwebs had claimed every corner. As I stepped inside, a faint chill ran through me despite the summer heat. In the center of the floor, I noticed something new: a small, crudely carved wooden box. It hadn't been there before. Curiosity got the better of me. I knelt down and opened the box. Inside was a collection of odd trinkets: an old locket, a cracked mirror, a rusted key, and a small leather-bound journal. The journal's pages were yellowed and filled with cramped handwriting that didn't belong to anyone in my family. Most of it was incoherent ramblings, but one phrase repeated over and over: "The tree remembers. The tree keeps." As I flipped through the pages, I heard a faint rustling outside. I looked through the window, expecting to see the wind stirring the leaves. Instead, I saw shadows moving at the base of the tree. There were no figures, just shifting, dark shapes that seemed to pulse and writhe. I told myself it was a trick of the light, but unease settled in my chest. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the treehouse and the box. I decided to go back the next morning. When I climbed up, the box was gone. I was certain I hadn't taken it with me, and no one else in the house even knew I'd found it. As I stood there, I noticed scratches on the walls that I hadn't seen before. They formed crude drawings of stick figures, all standing in a line beneath a towering tree. Over the next few days, strange things began happening. At night, I'd hear faint creaking, like footsteps on wooden planks, coming from the backyard. Once, I woke up to find dirt and leaves scattered on the floor of my room, as if something had been tracking them in. My grandmother dismissed it as animals or my imagination, but I could see the worry in her eyes when I mentioned the treehouse. The final straw came on the 3rd night. I woke to the sound of whispering. It was faint, almost like the rustling of leaves, but the words were clear: "The tree keeps. The tree waits." The whispers seemed to come from outside. Heart pounding, I looked out my window and saw a faint light emanating from the treehouse. It flickered like candlelight, casting long shadows that danced across the yard. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way outside. The air was thick and heavy, and the oak tree loomed larger than ever. Climbing the ladder, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, but I couldn't stop myself. The treehouse was empty, yet the light persisted, seeming to come from the walls themselves. The stick figure drawings had multiplied, now forming a circle around a single figure inside the tree. I backed away, and that's when I heard it, a deep, guttural groan, as if the tree itself was alive. The floorboards began to vibrate, and I stumbled down the ladder, running back to the house without looking back. The next morning, I packed my bags and left, making an excuse about needing to get back to work. My grandmother didn't protest, but as I drove away, I saw her standing at the edge of the yard, staring up at the treehouse with a somber expression. I've since refused to visit that house. My grandmother insists the treehouse is just an old structure, falling apart with age. But I know what I saw. And sometimes, late at night, I dream of the treehouse, its shadows, its whispers, and a sense that it's waiting for me to return.
Emma and Jack had been best friends since they were kids, and the old treehouse in Jack's backyard was their shared fortress. It was nestled high in a massive oak tree, its weathered boards and squeaky ladder lending it a rustic charm. They'd spent countless summers up there, reading scary stories and making up secret pacts. One of their most memorable oaths was that they'd always face their fears together. Years passed, and the treehouse fell into disrepair as life pulled them in different directions. But one summer, Jack invited Emma back to visit. "We should check out the treehouse," he suggested, a spark of nostalgia in his eyes. Emma hesitated. Something about the treehouse always felt off, but she didn't want to disappoint Jack. The afternoon sun was dipping below the horizon as they approached the oak. The treehouse looked more decrepit than Emma remembered, its boards sagging and vines snaking up the supports. The ladder groaned under their weight as they climbed. Inside, everything was covered in dust, but it was intact. Jack found an old flashlight and waved it around, the beam illuminating faded drawings and forgotten trinkets. "Remember this?" Jack laughed, holding up a carved wooden figurine they'd made as kids. Emma smiled, but the unease lingered. "Do you hear that?" Emma asked suddenly. Jack paused, listening. The treehouse was silent except for the faint rustling of leaves. "It's just the wind," Jack said, brushing it off. They decided to stay for a while, reminiscing and laughing. As night fell, the treehouse grew darker, and the forest around them seemed to close in. Emma kept glancing at the window, convinced she saw movement in the shadows. "We should head back," Emma said finally, but Jack was lost in a story about their childhood adventures. Then, the scratching began. It started faint, like a branch scraping against the treehouse. Jack shone the flashlight toward the window, but nothing was there. The scratching grew louder, more deliberate, circling the walls. Emma's heart raced. "Jack." "What is that?" she whispered. Jack tried to act calm. "Probably a raccoon." "Let me check." He leaned out the window, scanning the tree with the flashlight. Suddenly, the beam flickered, and the scratching stopped. Jack pulled back inside, his face pale. "There's nothing out there," he said, his voice trembling. But before Emma could respond, the trapdoor they'd climbed through slammed shut. They both jumped, staring at it in disbelief. "Okay, this isn't funny," Emma said, her voice shaking. "I didn't do that," Jack replied. A low creaking noise filled the treehouse, and the boards beneath them began to vibrate. The flashlight's beam caught something scrawled on the far wall, new words scratched into the wood. "One stays, one leaves." "What the hell?" Jack said, backing away. "We're leaving." "Now," Emma said, pulling at the trapdoor. It wouldn't budge. Panic set in as the treehouse seemed to tilt, the walls groaning as if the entire structure were alive. The scratching returned, louder and more chaotic. Shapes began to form in the shadows, vaguely humanoid figures that seemed to blend into the wooden walls. One stepped forward, its eyes glowing faintly. "You made a pact," the figure rasped. Its voice sounded like wind through the branches. One stays, one leaves. Emma clutched Jack's arm. "We're not playing this game," she said, her voice defiant despite her fear. "You already did," the figure replied, gesturing to the carvings on the wall. Emma's eyes widened as she recognized the childish writing of their old pact. "Face our fears, no matter what." Jack grabbed the flashlight and shone it at the figure, but the light passed through it. The shadows around them grew thicker, pressing in. "Go," Jack said suddenly. "What?" Emma gasped. "If one of us has to stay, it'll be me," Jack said, his voice firm. "You've got a future, Emma. Go." Before Emma could protest, the trapdoor swung open. The shadows surged toward Jack, wrapping around him. Emma screamed as he pushed her toward the exit. "Run!" Jack shouted. Emma climbed down the ladder as fast as she could. When she reached the ground, she turned back, but the treehouse was dark and silent. She called out Jack's name, but there was no response. The next day, the treehouse was gone. The oak tree stood alone, its branches bare despite the summer season. Emma searched everywhere, but there was no trace of Jack. The only thing she found was the carved figurine they'd made as kids, lying at the base of the tree. To this day, Emma doesn't know what happened that night, but she swears she can still hear Jack's laughter when the wind blows through the trees.